So, hello, and thank you for being here. And we are in month eight of our webinars. I know it's amazing, but it's great that those of you who have joined us, thank you for being here. Hopefully, we'll get a few more people coming in as we roll along through the hour. But today we're talking about strategies, policy planning and land use, community engagement, education, and notification. And you're going to hear a little bit more from me about the stuff we've done in Paula. But meanwhile, Angie, is there anything you wanted to say to start us off?
Just that we've had a lot of really good discussions on the planning process. I think we're making a turn here now where we're going to flip to implementation and really doing this deep dive on what it looks like to actually do these strategies. What experiences have people had? And so we will do this for this will be like the next 3 webinars, today, next month, and the month after that. We're ticking off different types of strategies and really just diving in to see how tribes are implementing it, what they're learning, what they're experiencing, what problems they're encountering.
Right.
And that's it.
So I know there's only a few of us, but that doesn't mean we can't have a conversation, and hopefully others will be able to benefit from this when we post the recording and hear what those of us here are going to talk about. But I'm actually kind of excited by the opportunity because, Lori, you have a lot of great input, and Osamu, you always have great things to say, and Christina, I just love you. So, and you're a great contributor. So I think that we can have a little discussion about the suggested reading to start us off, but we're going to have a lot of discussion today. Oh, and here's Ryan. That's great. About a lot of questions that we have about strategies, and so that's going to come a little bit later. But for now, let's start off with talking about our reading on the Karuk tribe's health chapter of their adaptation plan. So even if you didn't get a chance to look real closely at the Karuk adaptation plan, this chapter is, I think, about 11 pages long out of an overall 200 plus page document, and it's graphics friendly. So there are some tables, and at the beginning of the chapter, there are bullets of the main takeaways from the chapter. And so if you just glance at that, and Angie, I think you're gonna put that on the screen so we can see. Can you actually scroll to the top of the chapter where they have the bullet points of the main findings? I think it's on.
It's 146 if you're all following along. And I can drop this in the chat as well, the link. It's not handy for you.
I really like the way they did this personally in talking about what the takeaways are. Having this little box at the top, which gives you that quick summary of what's going on for the Karuk. I think that's really, really helpful because, as many of us know, when it comes to providing this information to our leadership and to our community members, they're not going to read a 232 page document, and they may not even want to read, a 10 to 15 page chapter. So you can just point to this, or put this up on the whiteboard or on the screen if you're having a community meeting, and see what people think about what has been distilled down from the community's health concerns. And then if we go back to the box, or the boxes.
Can I point one thing out too here?
Yeah.
Just this is like really interesting that I haven't seen this in other ones, and I just think they're making a really good point here about smoke. They're saying, smoke's bad news, bad health consequences for them, ecological and environmental justice issue, and that they're talking about policies that attempt to create smoke exclusion without understanding the different circumstances under which smoke is generated are not only misguided and ineffective, they result in more hazardous smoke conditions. So I think they're talking about prescribed burning, not being given special exemption out of some of the smoke stuff. Or I'm not really sure, but I'd be interested in learning more about what they mean there with what policies they're concerned about.
I think you're absolutely correct. And many of you have probably heard about the work that Karuk has done on reintroducing cultural burning to their lands. And they are becoming rightfully famous for this. In fact, they were featured on a segment of a recent episode of Nova on PBS. And I haven't watched it yet, but my sister called me and she's like, do you know Leif Hillman? Do you know Earl Crosby? I'm like, I've worked with those guys. They're at Karuk. He's like, well, they're on Nova right now. So they're becoming famous in the world of nerds who watch Nova. But it's a good thing. And I think that's exactly what they're talking about with this smoke bullet here. But the question for you all, even if you haven't actually read the whole chapter, looking at these bullets is, do any of these particular health impacts or issues resonate for you with your communities or the people that you work with in your job? So I'll just pause there and see if anybody wants to chime in. Or I can just call on people. I'm thinking about.
I like this one, of course. We always talk about this at Paula. We've tried to emphasize this in our own programming. I'm glad they did it, and I like the way they talk about it later in the chapter too. I think it's an interesting way to talk about it, the mental health dimensions.
Yeah, and if I can, put somebody on the spot, I see that Ryan has joined us, and Ryan, you're in the Pacific Northwest, right?
Yes.
Yes. So what do you think about this? Because it's similar to your area. So like for the smoke example, is that something that you're dealing with as well?
Absolutely. And I like that they put that in here because we held we're trying to put together a climate sort of change group and want to get like this whole thing going. And one of the things we had like these like dimensions laid out, and the tribe was like, where's fire? You don't have fire in here. And it's funny because I took it back to my boss and I'm like, they want fire in there. And she's like, that doesn't belong in there. And I'm like, well, if the tribes are saying it belongs in there, then it belongs in there. Like they want it as a part of even just in their environmental health program. They're like, fire has to be in there. So definitely in the last couple of years, just like most places in the West, we've been in smoke, and it's probably going to be here again soon. And so I really appreciate that. I actually pulled up the document myself, and I'm like, I'm going to read through all of this and share it with everybody.
Yeah,
that's great. That's great, because that's exactly what we're trying to do with this. And I just couldn't help noticing that I think like 3 out of those 7 bullets had something to do with fire and smoke. Yes. So that's very, very clear for that community. And then if we, Angie is scrolling down to show the table that shows some of their adaptation strategies for the exposures that they have identified for themselves. And we were actually, before we started and started letting people in, Angie and I were looking at this and talking about the wording. So what they're calling approximate consequence here is what we would be calling a what do we call it?
Secondary exposure.
A secondary exposure. So what they're calling a climatic event to us is the exposure. And then the secondary exposure. So, for them, it's the climatic event and the proximate consequence. So you have increasing air temperatures, leading to heat stress, potentially death, algal blooms, so many things. And, Ryan, it's interesting. You should say that your higher ups are saying we shouldn't be including fire. What the heck? That makes no sense to me.
It's really upsetting, because my thing is we work for the tribes, we're driven by the tribes. So I'm sorry that it's your personal opinion that you feel like it doesn't belong in there, but it does belong in there. And what they say is the reality. And we have Nez Perce tribe, who they actually have I think in the country, the leading like asthma and air quality program in the nation for tribes. I mean, they're doing phenomenal research over there, and heat index is included in there as well. But I'm hoping to actually hire them to do a webinar. I'm going to start a webinar series, and that's going to be one of the presentations, and even talking about the difference between like a prescribed burn and then like massive fires. So that'll be interesting to connect those. And I'm actually working with another woman who they've started this whole nonprofit just around cultural burns, and she'll be doing a presentation for us as well. And when we get that out though, I'll share that with you guys, because that would be, I think, something all of our tribes would benefit from.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And I think that this will also figure into our conversation a little bit later when we're answering questions and putting notes in our mural board. I know we've got some agency folks on here as well. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts about what's included in here and how it might relate to the work you do with tribes.
Hi, sorry.
We worked with Karuk on the report, on their climate change report. And it was mind blowing how much work they're doing. And the fire especially was really important with Karuk. Not only the impacts of wildfire and wildfire smoke, but they have historically used cultural burns to reduce stream temperature. So they have a animal that's an indicator of stream health. And when that animal starts to falter, it's clear that the stream is too warm. And so you would use a cultural burn to cool the stream. And so, I mean, like, it's everything, it's all related.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Michelle, you were going to say something.
Hi, I just wanted to mention we recently held a tribal adaptation vulnerability assessment training with one of our tribes, and I thought it was really interesting. Like, we thought they were going to go more on the health-ish related side, but it was more to do with flooding events and water events and extreme weather events. So I thought that was kind of an interesting point to note, because we're in a different region. We serve Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. So we have a little bit of different, climatic events that might be happening here than you guys up in the Northwest.
And remind me which agency you're with?
I'm with Southern Plains Tribal Health Board.
Okay. But as you see here, that the Karuk talked about some of those water related things too. So like this one right here on the screen, the increase in rain and snow, landslides. I mean, up there, I went to school in Humboldt County, and that's where the Karuk are. And so I remember those little windy roads and how it would get wet, and the road, the mountainsides would just like slide right onto the road, even before we were having as much of an impact from climate change as we are now. Although the 90s, I feel like the 90s was last week. I know the 90s was like 30 years ago now, which I read something yesterday, you guys. We are closer to 2050 right now than we are to 1990. And I just don't want to know that. But anyway, the point is, in 30 years, things have gotten worse. But it's great that you're listening to the tribes and they're bringing up things that you wouldn't have necessarily put at the top of the list. And I had that experience as well when I was working specifically on Paula's adaptation plan. What our tribal members found to be most important was not what I would have put at the top of the list when I started doing the work. So yeah, that's why we listen to our communities, right?
I just like being a voyeur and kind of looking at what other people are selecting. Like, okay, so you got a lot of folks have similar problems, but the strategies being selected are across the board, and some of these are unique, and then some of them really relate to our topic today, which is, we're going to focus in today on community engagement, education, and notification as one category of strategies, and we're also focusing on policy planning and land use strategies. And so I see a couple here, like let's see, develop detailed plan within each clinic, such as which patients are most at potential risk. So that would be some sort of a planning process. I'd be really curious what kind of partners they need to do that. They must have a really good relationship between this tribe and their clinics, or maybe they run their clinics directly. I don't know. Another one here, they have a public awareness campaign, encourage and enable patients and community members with severe conditions to have backup supplies. So that would be something falling under the community engagement piece, the way we categorize it. Any of these other strategies standing out to anybody that's interesting, something you might think about?
Can you like zoom in on that document to make it bigger on that screen so there's not so much? Yeah.
I totally can. And I dropped the link in case you want to open it up on your own computer.
I will say that less about any of the things that's sticking out to me specifically is more their organization of this data or of this information. I love how simple this is. You know, here's the issue, here's what it causes, you know, here's the real effect, and then here's what we're going to do. And then I'm hoping, you know, that ultimately, you know, they're also working on taking this and then adding yet another column to it that says, and here's how we're actually going to implement these suggestions. You know, and that's what we're all here to do, is to give each other ideas for not just recognizing the effects, but what we're going to do to implement the solutions. You know, that's not what's in the plan, but I'm hoping that that's what's going to be what they're going to be talking about when they revise this plan. Maintain and expand public air centers is right in the center of the screen. So maybe their next iteration will say, you know, public air center opened in 2022. And boy, is that great to be able to go back to that and say, we didn't just write this down, we actually did something, you know, and that's the whole reason we're all here together, is so that we can do something. And I'll see, Lori put something in the chat that Karuk did a great job, not only addressing long-term impacts of climate, but emergent issues. And I'll just tie that back briefly to what Ryan had said, that, you know, somebody in your agencies or your organization is saying, you know, why do we have fire in here? Well, you can characterize that as an emergent issue, even if you're not going to say it's directly climate change caused. It's getting hotter, it's getting smokier, there's going to be more fires. So, you know, that's an emergent issue, or actually a happening issue, and we have to address it. We don't need to argue about what the cause is. We just know that it's happening. All right, Angie,
Can I just chime in for 1 second? I think one issue that doesn't get enough attention is the toxic algal blooms as an emergent issue, because, you know, this is something that is related to land use kind of practices, and especially agricultural practices. And I really appreciate seeing those kind of like long-term strategies listed here in terms of reducing the agricultural inputs to the watershed, because I think that is a big part of, you know, why these algal blooms can't happen, is they need the food, they need the nitrogen and phosphorus to actually happen. And I think it's easy to fixate on, okay, how do we, you know, use chemicals to reduce that in our, you know, aquifer, our reservoirs and water supply, but you know, in the longer term, I think it's important to think about, you know, riparian buffers and other ways that you can, you know, do traditional agricultural practices and reduce the amount of fertilizer that's running off into your reservoir systems. And that's hard, and that's long-term work. And so, you know, I think it's easy to fixate on just the kind of monitoring and checking to see if the algal blooms are toxic or not, but there really is this kind of tougher and sometimes, you know, kind of a political challenge of trying to work with farmers to, you know, improve your water quality. And with increased heat and with wildfire debris running off into your watersheds too, there's, you know, this is just going to increase in its likelihood of causing problems in the future, as it already is.
Yeah, I like that they're trying to get their medical folk in town involved in this issue, which is nice to see. And I also like that they tied it in with cultural impacts, right? So, you know, like us, they think of cultural and spiritual impacts as being part of health. And so they're talking about algal blooms having an impact on ceremonial, subsistence, basketry. So I like that they made that connection, and then it's like, and then I'm curious. I think they're just trying to address the water quality issue, and I'd be curious how they're going to try to protect themselves from the cultural impacts.
well, and to be clear, well, two things. I think somewhere in this chapter, they have a photo of a jar of water from one of their water sources that's just green because of all the algae. So, you know, a picture, cliche. But the other thing is that I was just talking with one of our water folks in Paula, and heard that there's harmful algal blooms happening in one of the local reservoirs. And so, I tend to think of the algae as being more of a shellfish and subsistence food issue when it comes to tribes, but it's actually, you've got algae in your water sources, your reservoirs, that's supplying not just tribal communities, but communities in general. Now, we're not dealing with that in Paula because our water is all groundwater, but it makes me wonder, is it possible for groundwater to end up having algae issues or algae growing in your pipes once it comes out from the groundwater and gets into the surface or the barely subsurface infrastructure? Does that warm up? I don't know. Now I don't even want to know. Now I'm afraid to drink anything.
Yeah, and the tribes that are dealing with this HABs issue, they've tested, at least in Big Valley area, they've tested the finished water, the water that comes out of the pipe, off tribal lands as well. And they're finding high levels of HABs in the finished water. That's scary. And that people are now seeing as normal that you call EPA that morning if your kids want to go swimming, because, are the HABs level dangerous enough in Clear Lake that your kids can't swim? Oh, it's no big deal. We just call EPA. I mean, that's not normal. You shouldn't have to call EPA to see if you can swim.
There's one other issue I think that ties with the algal blooms that's coming up, and I just saw an article they mentioned in Florida. There's other things connected to these increased temperature waters and algal blooms, like the flesh-eating bacteria and the amoeba that can be found in extremely warm water that can basically infect people and eat your brain, which I think we'll see an increase of as shallow water warms up with climate change and more people are active in these kind of hot water environments.
Thanks, Kurt.
I want to piggyback on that because I heard this up in Idaho as well, is that holding of massive amounts of water, where algae blooms can grow, obviously because of the heat, the sunlight, all of that. There was a lot of talk about, state holding back water in these reservoirs specifically for recreational purposes because they're making money for boating and, the state is on that kind of parks department side, but yet they're also holding back this water for recreation and then not releasing it through for the salmon, which, we know all about that. But, so, somehow, somewhere in there too, I just think about, things that could be prevented, but they're not because of money makers like that, because of recreational type of things.
And the money thing. So here in California, we have beneficial uses that are considered by our state water boards and then at the local level. And Sarah Ryan from Big Valley just yesterday did a training on the tribal beneficial uses for water quality. But that's something that we have in California, and we're still, Ryan, like you pointed out, we're going to be fighting with other entities that are making money off of recreational uses or don't want to be responsible for a higher level of water quality just because tribes might be doing medicinal plant gathering or basketry materials. And so, we're always kind of fighting with that system to protect something that is this important. And now we're having a full conversation about brain-eating bacteria in the chat. So, no wonder. That's why I have a headache today. I must have a brain-eating bacterium. That's
After waiting
horrifying.
in the rainwater, Shasta.
I know. What am I going to do? All right, this is a great discussion, but I think we should probably move on to our next agenda item, which is, Angie, you're going to be talking about strategies.
Yeah, I just thought I would again kind of warm up. I mean, the conversation's pretty warm already, but just kind of back to the topic of the day, kind of set the stage a little. Like I said, we've kind of been talking through some of the deeper issues in vulnerability assessments for you folks that have been through it and the adaptation plan. So we're going to kind of assume now that we've adopted a plan, we're implementing it, and these are the kinds of strategies. This is just how we at the Tribal Climate Health Project have grouped strategies, and I'll show you why we group them But it just makes it a little bit more digestible sometimes if you're going to come up with quite a few strategies, just to give them like a type. So today, like I said, we're talking about policy planning and land use, community engagement and notification. And then later on, we'll be talking about those that fall more under cross-agency collaboration, operations and management, data information and technology, and infrastructure improvements. And that was just, that's how they fall out, at least to me. If you were to pile them into like things, you may find that there's another way you think of them that categorizes it differently. And the categories, they don't matter so much. It just helps us talk about some stuff at the same time. You guys know the Easy tool, but I wanted to just point out the Easy tool dives into strategies a lot. And if all you wanted to do was to be like, well, what are some strategies I could do? You could just use this tool to filter out, like, how could I address temperature extremes? And you could actually filter, and it will just show the adaptation strategy options that can support you in trying to address temperature extremes. Or you could do the same. You could filter, I want to know everything that's going to help me with protecting my tribe's health. You could, human health, you can filter by cultural, spiritual health, socioeconomic health. But you can also filter by these types. And so I actually did that for the live. It disappeared. Oh no, here it is. I did it for the live tool here. And I'll just kind of point out to you, there's a lot of, and this is just a menu of things that you might consider doing as a strategy. So, you can develop an integrated pest management plan. You could create a tribal habitat restoration or conservation plan. You can see that a lot of these strategies actually serve a lot of the need, right? They serve a lot of the exposures, secondary exposures or impact types that you might have identified in your vulnerability assessment as being a problem for you. So say, I got a big issue with wildfire. One option for protecting health in the policy planning and land use category would be to develop or update an integrated pest management plan. That's one of a lot of options. And then some of them are more complicated, like assert or renegotiate your water related treaty rights. So I'm not saying any of these are easy, just here's some ideas.
Well, and that's the other part, the evaluate, the rest of the spreadsheet too. You can rank your status, you can rank your need, and you can probably add on to that. I think we have that in here, like how hard or easy is it? Feasibility. Yeah, like, do we have the money for this? Do we have the expertise for this? So, that's something else that can be used, I think, as it's not an exposure, but it's a kind of impact. We need to do this, but we don't have the money. Like Osamu said in the chat here, you need expensive water filters in your treatment system to filter out HAB cyanotoxins. That's a lot of money, so it might be a high need, but the feasibility might be low because of the expense. So that's another way to categorize your risks and your exposures.
Yeah, so this tab is it's mainly meant for the adaptation planning phase where you're trying to select strategies and evaluate which ones you really narrow down your list of stuff that you want to do. So you're first kind of making sure you're actually going to address your the vulnerabilities, and then you can evaluate, is this really needed? How much is this needed? And is it feasible? And then you could do some planning, right? So if in my plan, when I do an adaptation plan, I like to do all this in the plan, because I don't like a plan that isn't ready to be translated into action. But some people just kind of stop at the measures and then later might come up with a work plan or an implementation plan. And that's part of their implementation of their plan, is to figure out things like, what's the time frame? What's the time frame? Who's responsible? Which department is going to actually take this on, be bought in, and be accountable for getting it done? Is there any other involved departments? What kind of potential resources do you have? Is there an estimated budget? What are your potential funding needs? And what we did at Paula is actually take this out a little bit further. We have some notes, and we use this % complete to date to track progress on how are we doing with actually implementing the strategies that we've selected over time. And so this is just to show you that this is something available to you to use as both a selection and a tracking system for your strategies. And if all you do is just look this up and look at some ideas, we would be happy for that as well. But here's, I've just plucked out on these categories we're going to talk about today, just plucked out some of the strategies just to, again, wet the whistle, and then we're going to hear some examples and then talk about more of your examples. So there's things like drought mitigation, water resource management plans, health or emergency plans, policies to protect and restore wetlands and watersheds, or to restrict development in high-risk areas. Local governments do that a lot because they always have building codes. Tribes sometimes have codes and might make policy around restricting development in high-risk areas, especially those that continue to have recurring impacts or climate events. So say you've got you're just constantly flooding in this one area around your river, let's not put our next big economic venture there, or let's not build housing there. Okay, let's decide that's a bad idea. We're going to find a better, more safe spot to do it. And then we're going to talk about community engagement, education, and notification. So a bunch of things to do here, and I'm separating this out from all right, so we're not talking about the planning process now, which of course includes a ton of community engagement if you've got the time to do it. But what about after, right? Once you have your plan, once you're implementing, you're actually adapting, there's all this role for including your community in some way. That might look like emergency notifications. In the moment, you've got a flood, a heat event, you've got even drought. You can even be alerting your community about drought conditions. How do you actually alert them? Do you have a system in place? Are there human beings that talk to each other? What does that distribution of information look like? Ideally as real time as possible, because this stuff happens, right? And you want to make people prepared so they can protect themselves. And so in some cases, you could be shipping out services and support in real time. And then, also you do education around your vulnerabilities. We have done this at Paula, where there's been some education around, well, what do these health impacts really look like? What symptoms should you be aware of? Where would you go if you're experiencing them? And how are they going to change with climate change? Youth programs, engaging elders. And then there's all these really cool programs we've seen about community members that are actually helping to monitor and observe climate changes within the community and help do kind of local observation or data tracking. Kind of cool. I know they do that up in Alaska really well. So that's just some, those are the kinds of strategies we want to dive more deeply into today. And I wonder if we could start with Shasta, who is going to tell us more about her emergency notification system.
Yes, so we started as part of our strategy for community awareness an emergency notification system primarily based on text alerts. And there are lots of different systems out there that you can use for basic text alerts, but we chose one that is actually fairly fleshed out in terms of what it allows you to do, and it's called Alert Media. But I won't go too much into that platform specifically. The whole point of this was that we want to be able to inform the community when there is any sort of threat actually to the community, whether it's a health threat or a safety threat, or even in instances where there's a traffic accident on one of the main roads into or out of the reservation, which there happened to be today. So I got a text from one of my staff saying, I'm stuck in traffic because somebody decided to, have a fender bender on the grade and the road is blocked and I can't get down. So that's the sort of thing we'd send out an alert for. Don't go up Paula Temecula Road because some yahoos decided to crash their cars. I'd put it more diplomatically than that. But the point is that we have put this out there to the community to sign up, and it's an opt-in system, which I will say is a little bit of a weakness. I would love to be able to force, that's a terrible word, but make it an involuntary thing, but we can't force community members to give us their cell phone numbers and accept our text messages. But it's actually been really great because we've had it for a couple of years now, and there have been some disasters or emergencies that are climate related. So we had a wildfire that was just right over the border of the reservation, and there was smoke, there was fire, obviously. Our situation here is that we only have a few roads into and out of the reservation, so you've got to be very aware of things like this. If it blocks access and we need people to evacuate, then you've got to give people up-to-date information about what's going on when there's something like a fire. So I was on the emergency alert system for a good part of that day, keeping people up to date on where the fire was, whether the roads were open, and evacuation order status from CAL FIRE, which was the lead agency on the fire. And I mean, is that directly climate change? No, but the situation that allowed that fire to happen, that to make it more likely to happen, the dry fuels and ongoing and persistent drought and high heat, they all made it more likely that a fire was going to occur. Similarly, when there have been fires that are further away, but they've had an impact on air quality, we can send out an emergency alert that says air quality is in the unhealthy range today. Those with asthma, those with, COPD, those who are otherwise sensitive, you need to stay indoors. You need to, wear a mask, and not just a cloth mask, but a tight fitting N95 or KN95. We're hearing all about this over the last week or so with all the fires in Canada affecting the Northeast. And I have to admit, there was a part of me that was like, welcome to our world out here in the West. We're used to that. Lori, I see you nodding. I know that you were really affected by some of the fires in Northern California when that was happening and the pictures of the orange skies, but not everybody knows how dangerous that is or what to do to mitigate those impacts. We can also use this system to send them to our webpage that has, strategies for what do you do when it's super hot? What do you do when it's super smoky? Where are the places you can go? We have cooling centers. And I'll say that's probably the one that we've used the most with our alert system is I get emails every day from the local Bureau of the National Weather Service letting us know what's the weather going to be for the week to come and when we're going to have a triple digit heat situation, especially if it's multiple days. As soon as I find that out, I send that alert. Get ready, make plans that you're going to be, not outdoors. If you're planning some sort of an outdoor activity and it's going to be 113 this weekend, consider rescheduling, take it indoors. Again, here's our cooling centers. And this one is really key. I find that a lot of people don't know. Here are the signs and symptoms of heat stroke and heat exhaustion. So that if you see somebody who's in trouble, you know how to identify the system or the symptoms. And I think a lot of people don't realize that when you finally get to the point of heat stroke, that you're not going to be red and flushed and sweating. You actually get kind of dry and pale. And that is a life-threatening emergency. We need people to know that stuff. That's what our alert system is for. And I would say we've probably got about 300 people subscribed at this point. And that includes people who live in Paula and people who work in Paula, because we want to protect all of those things. And all those people, I should say. And we've even got our emergency manager over at the Paula Casino, which might be filled with thousands of clients or customers, visitors, whatever they call them, people. And they need to know too, if there's a wildfire nearby, or if people are going to start showing up from the community, not because they want to gamble, but because their air conditioning went out, because the power went out, because the heat is so high, and they need to know that there's a place they can go. So it works on so many levels, and I strongly recommend spending just a little bit of money, not necessarily on the alert media system, but on a basic text alert system to let people know when there is something they need to be concerned about.
I love it. Hey,
Questions,
Shasta,
comments?
do you have any analytic? Do you have any information on, it sounds like it's working.
Yeah.
Do you know, is there an open rate or anything? Do you get any feedback on people using it, reading it?
Yeah, well, because it's mostly texts, we don't get a read results, but when you send out the emails, or I'm sorry, the alerts, there's a little meter on the Alert Media website that shows how many phones have received it.
Oh, cool.
So you know that there's a success rate, and so sometimes people unsubscribe, and so you're accidentally sending it to a subscriber who's not wanting to receive them anymore. And so you get a list for that too, who is unsubscribed. And sometimes there are people I know and I call them and harass them. I'm like, why'd you unsubscribe from my list? What the heck? You know, oh, I changed my phone number, sorry, you know, or, and this works two ways actually, or multiple ways. Primarily we do it as a text alert and also as an email. So you can get it both ways. And then there's also a phone-based system where a creepy electronic voice will read it. And so people can opt in for that and have it be read to them, or you know, their phone will ring and they answer and it will say, you know, it'll read the message. I don't use that one as much. I find people don't answer numbers that they don't recognize, but they're going to look at a text.
So Samo's telling us that even his grandma has a phone, and she, you know, so everybody can access alerts these days that way. So that's for better or for worse, he says. And Lori, do you want to share this one?
One of the tribes we worked with worked in cooperation with their tribal radio station and got a grant that benefited both the station and the environmental department. And then the station was kind of co-opted, that's a wrong word, encouraged to work with the EMS system rather than against it. Sometimes different departments get proprietary. They're like, oh no, people just tune into tribal radio, they don't need this. But then when they're benefiting and getting money, they can both be sending the alerts. Alerts can, you know, tune into tribal radio for more information, and
Yeah.
both of them got the money. So it was pretty good.
Yeah, Lori, thanks for bringing that up, because we also have a radio station in Paula, and it's right now it's a small frequency station. It only, you know, technically is supposed to be about a mile radius. I've heard it about, you know, 6 or 7 miles away if you're in the right position to get the signal. But our radio station manager is working on expanding that so that it can be servicing other tribes. We have a lot of tribes in our immediate area. And so we're working with them to get that radio station signal boosted, and especially because of emergencies. It seems like even if your cell phone towers all go out, you know, unless there's, you know, complete destruction of your radio towers, a radio signal is something you're always going to have. And that has worked back and forth between the radio station and my alerts, because our manager gets those alerts too. So he's able to be online on the radio and say, you know, the latest, you know, Paula emergency alert is that the, you know, road 76 West is closed due to the fire. So, you know, please exit to the east towards Palma, you know, and people are listening to that. So there's, I'll use one of those corporate words. There are synergies.
It's so powerful to be able to really communicate with people in real time, like
Yeah.
1,000 different ways. So I'm excited. Just excited. I actually hadn't heard that much about it, and I'm just happy it's working as well as it is. I want to say too, there's other levels of government that use this strategy too, right? You might get a text alert from, I think I don't know. And there's another system that your phone is sort of tied into an emergency system, and then, or you might have signed up for the county. But
Yeah.
either way, like I think you've demonstrated, Shasta, why a tribe having its own really matters, right? Because there's things that just might apply to your community, and you want to have the control to be able to alert folks.
Well, I will tell you an anecdotal metric that when I was doing all the alerts for that fire we had a couple of years ago, I had some people tell me that they got my alerts before they got alerts from the county or from CAL FIRE.
You win.
Yay!
Yeah.
Plus, you want to know what's going on at home. Like, it's great to get a Nixle alert, and I use Watch Duty for wildfires, but the ones I pay attention to are my local people.
Yeah. Right. Any other questions for Shasta on her program or her system?
Sign up if you want to hear what's going on in Paula, you know.
Let's go to Asamu. You're still ready to talk with us, right? You were going to share some land use examples from some of the tribes that you work with in your role at California Department of Public Health.
Yeah, and I don't have any slides today, but I'll just kind of talk
Okay.
through some of my past experiences, and I'm excited to dive in more with folks as we have kind of further work with tribes. But I was actually going to share some kind of before CDPH experiences I've had as well, just to talk about the like range of different things happening out there. And I wanted to start off by saying, you know, for many of our California tribes, you might not have any land to work with. And so what you might actually need to back up when we think about land use planning for climate change adaptation, or for resilience, maybe installing things like installing solar panels. I mean, you really need the precondition of having land. And so I think there's a lot of exciting things happening right now in terms of tribes being able to reclaim their stolen land, or secure access to some of those stolen lands, even if they haven't secured ownership yet. So I think there's a range of different strategies to even talk about there in terms of like, how do you go about reclaiming access and ownership? But if you do have some land, then that raises all sorts of questions about, well, how do we, we've talked a lot about climate adaptation planning as its own document, but how could you even in your comprehensive tribal community planning stick climate resilience and adaptation into almost every facet of those plans? And so I'll share a couple examples, but just to kind of briefly overview, everything from the development of your natural resources to your traffic planning and whether or not you have backup roads or other transportation systems in case of flooding. We've seen a lot of flooding in California recently. Some of our tribal partners that has taken out all of their basically road systems. Thinking about the resilience of those to flooding, and kind of some of the kind of longer term strategies that you can do in addition to the shorter term emergency planning, I think is really important. And I would just say it really comes back to a lot of the times how you are citing kind of these key infrastructural components if they haven't been built yet, or how you are kind of zoning your tribal lands if you have some kind of comprehensive planning in place. So I'll just share a couple of examples. I've done the most work in the kind of land use context on renewable energy siting and flooding, which may or may not be relevant to your tribe. But I'll just start by saying, in terms of flooding, FEMA has these flood maps that they create for communities. And in some instances, flood mapping of tribal lands occur when they're aerially flood mapping communities surrounding a tribe. And many tribes have kind of been flood mapped as a part of this in this manner. And there's this act, the Federal Flood Disaster Protection Act of 1973, that prohibits the use of federal funds, including the Indian Housing Block Grant and the Indian Community Development Block Grant, on sites that FEMA has mapped as being in the floodplain, unless you're participating in the National Flood Insurance Program and purchasing flood insurance, which I think folks are aware has become very expensive and is continuing to become more expensive. So I think there's really a stick there in terms of like what you might need to think about in terms of the restrictions on utilizing some different funding sources for development in the floodplain. And I think you can think about adaptation to flooding in terms of adaptation in place. So how are we fortifying or making floodproof the buildings that we already have in the floodplain, versus retreating from the floodplain, versus kind of ensuring with the acknowledgement that insurance is expensive and will continue to become pricier. So I've worked with a couple tribes, the Ile-de-Jean Charles tribe, as part of their retreat from an island that has been hit by hurricanes pretty relentlessly over the past several decades, to a place 30 miles inland. As part of that, we were in dialogue with some of the Alaska Native villages that are also experiencing flooding because of the place that they were forced to settle, because of BIA policies around needing to have schools by riverbanks, so that
Oh, interesting.
yeah, so it's interesting because we historically, a lot of the Alaska Native villages would be more seasonal and wouldn't, have permanently sited themselves on a riverbank where they know that, there's a chance the permafrost will melt and your whole house will fall into the water. So, I think it was really, we can think about how federal policies have forced different peoples to live in more vulnerable locations. And a lot of the land use planning, this really significant, expensive, intensive land use planning that the tribes that I worked with have had to do is really to kind of rectify that situation and try to move themselves in some cases to places that are more secure. So, I think there's a lot to say about those kind of retreat initiatives, and many tribes, I think that's more extreme of a measure than they probably have to do. But I'm happy to talk more about that at some point if people are interested in discussing, what kind of has gone, I can see for the most part pretty badly with those attempts to resettle whole communities. But there's a lot you can do in place to improve your flood resilience using land use and really intentionally not trying to develop in places that are in the floodplain. And I think, there's a lot of energy and time that's gone into reforming FEMA and trying to make those programs that they have more accessible to tribes, maybe with debatable results, but that is definitely a resource there for tribes. And FEMA has a lot of these kind of silver jacket programs and other programs to support you if that's something that you're serious about doing. In terms of, these other kinds of hazards, we can think about land use planning for heat as really being focused around vegetation and tree canopy. It's really incredible what a tree can do to reduce the heat island effect. So, the effect we get from lots of pavement and things that increase the kind of like the retention of heat in built areas. So, we have many tribes that maybe don't characterize themselves as urban necessarily, but having lots of unvegetated paved areas can still contribute to how hot things are, and you can reduce your kind of active cooling needs. So, how much energy you're having to spend on conditioning your homes and your tribal government buildings by really increasing your tree canopy. And I think, there's some strategy there around trying to make sure that it's also, you're doing that in a way that's wildfire safe. But I think that's what to think about in that category. And then we already talked a little bit earlier about just the kind of water quality and how to protect yourself from, runoff from wildfire debris, protect your water systems, as well as reducing nutrient runoff into the watershed to reduce the likelihood of toxic algal blooms. So those are some other things you could think about in terms of like, how do we do land use planning that is climate smart? I just wanted to also touch on site planning. So this is another, I think major land use area is thinking about, renewable energy projects take a lot of land and they can be kind of controversial with the neighbors. I think, so that's something to consider. I think there's a lot of forethought that can prevent some kind of foreseeable conflicts with your neighbors or other kind of folks who might be oppositional to your renewable energy projects. But I know, I think Blue Ridge Rancheria, is it Blue Lake?
Blue Lake.
Yeah, have done a ton of really great renewable energy development and microgrid work. And I'd be interested to hear them kind of give their reflections on how that process has gone and how they've created kind of the long-term plan for doing renewable energy and installing their microgrid.
Maybe
And
we
then-
can get somebody to
Yeah.
talk during our infrastructure when we do a deep dive on infrastructure. That would be a good one.
Great. And I just wanted to say to kind of close out, as we talk about these different tribes that are regaining ownership over their stolen lands, there's a lot of management challenges that come with that. So you'll need to think about where is the funding going to come from if you want to do restoration projects, if you want to take down buildings, or maybe even develop parts of these lands. That takes a lot of money and a lot of time. And so I think if we can kind of have a brain trust with one another and kind of keep track of these different exciting things that are happening as tribes are restoring their lands, we can also think about kind of climate smart development and land use as a unit, because I think this is a really exciting trend we're seeing all over the place. So I'll just pause there.
That was really helpful. And you made me realize is I don't have land back as an adaptation strategy in the easy tool, but you know what? It's probably the best one. I mean, and this realization just happened to me, like in the interest of deep dive, right? Because we wanted to let's dive deep on what does this really look like to do it. I just had this conversation with a tribe. I won't say who it's a buyback, right? They're buying, it's a trust land thing. So they bought it, they weren't giving it back. And eventually they're going to look for recognition on those lands. But they have so many issues on their actual reservation, which like everybody else is subpar, not located in the best area. Even the trust lands aren't the prime area, but that's if you could throw all your hopes and dreams for a climate stable future onto that new land in a way. I mean, you could really envision a community design to withstand a lot of the impacts that are coming. Like you kind of get this clean slate in a way. And so they have this decent acreage that then they can play around with, and they can be thoughtful because it's, like I said, a blank slate. And so they can take into account all the things that we just found in their vulnerability assessment to see what maybe they can throw some water storage on there. Maybe they need a backup energy system. Maybe they need different kinds of housing. Maybe they need to put a helipad. Who gets like a new plot of land to play around with once they've kind of envisioned the future? And I'm not saying it's easy, and they had to buy it, and that stinks.
But the land is necessary. Yeah. It's like, you have to have the land in order to explore any of those topics. And I think just to back up even further, you need, what I've seen with some of the unrecognized tribes I've worked with is you really need tribal sovereignty and federal recognition to do kind of this really long-term comprehensive adaptation planning. So both the Alaska Native villages that we worked with and the Ile-de-Jean Charles tribe struggled with the kind of lack of federal recognition and kind of their own ability to do land use planning and own the lands that they were moving to because they didn't have that federal recognition. So I think federal recognition to me we can consider it an adaptation strategy, a kind of corporate adaptation strategy.
Yeah, and I want to open it up, but I just say you talked about resources, right, to develop that in a sustainable kind of adaptive way. It makes me think, at least here in California, about the transformative climate communities, and that's what that sprung to my mind. It's like a thing open right now. It's a huge amount of money for a small, like a contiguous area, like to get the development right so that it's low emission and adaptive. And so there are these resources, and at least in California, to do stuff like that if you were able to actually get land back.
And
all right, anybody?
Yeah, I was going to say, on that same note, maybe when we start talking about some of our breakout group questions, I have a few things I want to observe about the land back idea. Or I could just do that now. since there's only 10 of us, I'm kind of wondering if maybe it would be worthwhile to just tackle these questions all in a group and be able to feed off one another. Lori's giving me the applause for that.
Yeah.
But I just want to point out that, of course, and I apologize for this, we tend to be very California focused here because that's where we are. And because there's 106 now, I think, federally recognized tribes in California. Only Alaska has more. But let's just pause and take a moment to talk about land status. And Michelle, I'm thinking of you, and you said Oklahoma and some surrounding states. The status of tribal land in Oklahoma is different and complicated. So, sometimes these ideas aren't necessarily going to translate. I'm thinking of this, the smallest tribe I know that I work closely with in terms of their land is Hamul Indian Village. They have 4 acres. It's tiny. So certainly, could they use more land? Absolutely. And to be able to help their community. And then I'm thinking of my friend John Eagle, who is the TIPO for the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe with 2.5 million acres. And I'm sure he would love to have all of the Oyate land back. But he's already dealing with 2.5 million acres. So there's definitely a spectrum when it comes to land and land tenure and land management and land status and recognition issues, and they are complicated issues. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. That's it.
Does
Michelle,
anybody
I see
else
that
want to chime in? Yeah.
And Michelle, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to touch on what you were saying. I mean, if you look at the tribal jurisdiction maps in Oklahoma alone, and like the vast majority of the land that they encompass, it's encompassing like major cities as well as just these small rural places. And so it's definitely just, a complete mixture of individuals and people, but the jurisdiction covers quite a big swath of land. So it gets very confusing. It can get, if you really don't have those partnerships or collaboration with the different cities and townships in the area, then it gets kind of messy.
Yes, and let's not forget some of the more recent Supreme Court decisions that have to do with criminal jurisdiction in Indian lands, but I can never remember the name of the dang case, but the recent case from a couple of years ago that basically said all of Oklahoma is Indian land. And that had big implications for criminal justice, but it also had implications for a lot of other things as well. And also, let me just give a McGirt, thank you. I can never remember the dang name of the case, McGirt. If you didn't already hear this today, there's some fantastic, totally unexpected good news. Yes, Osama, you just put it in the chat. That Brackeen versus Holland was found 7-2. The court found that ICWA in its entirety is upheld. I cannot believe that. I am so excited. I was so scared because if the Supreme Court had decided against that against ICWA in that case, it could have undermined tribal sovereignty top to bottom. So that is hugely good news. For those who might not know what ICWA is, you probably all do, Indian Child Welfare Act. So I can't wait to read that decision because I'm the kind of nerd that will actually read the entire decision. So Alito and Clarence Thomas can suck a butt, but the other 7, nicely done. Okay, sorry, moving on. I was just very excited about that today.
I just
right.
wanted to say something really quick. This is Elizabeth Perez.
Hi,
I
Elizabeth.
was in DC a couple of weeks ago, a week and a half ago, and what I did learn from a lot of these were Biden appointees and folks within the field. One thing I did learn is that we're ahead of the game here in California, and not to be a California snob, but I kind of am because I'm from here. We typically are because we have to be, right? Especially in Indian country. And ahead of the game meaning, and I praised your team a lot, which I still have to make that connection with your team to the folks in DC. I praised your team a lot, and I'm going to connect your team with the folks in DC on the climate adaptation because we don't have one nationally as a plan. And sorry, somebody called me right in the middle of this, but we don't have one as a plan for a nation. And so your team is doing amazing work. And I just wanted to say that out loud to the rest of the team. So all of the training that we're getting right now, all of this talk and discussion, this is exactly what needs to be happening on not only a state level, but also a national level. So just wanted to give you guys kudos for that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It feels good to get that support from our partners, and you're one of them. Everybody on these calls is a partner. So thank you for that. It feels good. But there's tons of work to do. And a lot of nuance, which is important in this discussion. So like Osama, what you said about Ile de Jean Charles, they're in a very, they have a very specific issues that they're dealing with, but it has implications for the work that other tribes are doing. And then let's also just roll into the mix something that's not usually a California issue, which is treaty rights. And so again, I'm thinking about Ryan. The tribes in your area have treaty rights, and there's going to be some effects from climate change on how those treaty rights can be realized, gathering and fishing, et cetera, in usual and accustomed areas. Well, the tribes don't have control over those lands, but they have access to those lands. So how are we going to manage that as part of your climate adaptation planning? And actually, I wonder if you have an answer to that. What are you doing when it comes to protecting treaty rights and climate change?
Well, there's a few tribes that have treaty rights in the area. They don't all have treaty rights because some were terminated and brought back. But we there was a drought conference and I invited some tribal folks to speak, and they wanted me to do a land acknowledgement, but obviously my job as a Native person is not to do a land acknowledgement really for these folks who are all non-tribal. So what I did instead was I was like, hey, I want to bring up this issue that we have treaty rights for you people that don't know, they're like living acts of law, like they're still intact and you might not know that. And so what I do is advise people to look those up, and just to know that we have to still uphold those. And our tribes that do have treaty rights, they are constantly using them, where they're getting stomped on. But I think just reminding people of that all the time. And sometimes I heard somebody mention earlier, renegotiating treaty rights. I'm like, I don't understand why people don't do that currently. I do feel like I know that's, a battle 50 years in court, right? But I think about that with climate change and everything that's happened, how come we aren't renegotiating for additional rights for the environment and for what's happening? But hopefully maybe that'll be something that comes in the future. But
That's a really good point.
Yeah, and I'm not perfectly versed though on all the treaty rights, but I do know for the tribes that do have them, they are constantly in court. Even hunters, for tribes, they are constantly in court all the time and making sure that those are being upheld.
So I thank you for that. I know we're not in the group discussion in the mural yet, but I just put a sticky with renegotiating treaty rights in there because I don't want to forget that. That never even occurred to me because I don't think there are any tribes with this, save maybe one of the tribes on the border between California and Oregon has some treaty rights, but no tribes. The treaties in California were all unratified. So I don't think about that too much, but that's a great piece of advice. Work those treaty rights and renegotiate them.
Absolutely. Just because they were ratified, that doesn't mean tribes can't go in and try to get some of those back. And especially when it comes to, I think, hunting and gathering and some water rights, I think the water rights will be harder to fight because there's such a fight for water in general. But why not, right?
Yeah.
Ours.
No, thank you
Hey,
for that.
Shasta,
That's great.
could you actually drop that mural link for all of us?
Sure,
Let's
sure.
do it because we're kind of already in this discussion, and I'm going to open it up for all to see. And I think everybody should even be able to drop a post-it on here yourself if you feel up to it. So we just have, we have some time here. We're kind of already doing it, but we wanted to spend a little time talking, diving a little deeper into these strategies and more about your experiences and just sort of just track some of them. So again, we're talking about policy planning and land use strategies, and we're also talking about community engagement, education, and notification. And there's just a few topics we wanted to get through and discuss. First one was, what adaptation strategies in this category have you implemented? And so I think we've already begun hearing, and we could drop some stuff in here. We've heard about Shasta, your emergency notification system.
Yes. Oh, I love looking at the little animals here. Visiting hippopotamus. Visiting koala. Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, I'm not sure if other people can do stickies or not, but as you are thinking about these questions, just shout them out, or even, put them in the chat and I'll paste them over into a sticky. And then, Elizabeth, since you've joined us, I know you've got your role as a consultant, but I'd love to hear about you from a tribal member perspective too, about some of the stuff that you may have done in your community.
And Osama, in your presentation, you mentioned quite a few types of strategies. I know one of the things you touched on was the retreat or zoning for to try to avoid development in difficult areas.
There's some way to be able to contribute. I'm not able to add a.
No, unfortunately, we didn't realize until it was too late that this platform, you have to pay for people to have access that they can actually edit. So you can only look at it. You can't, only Angie and I can add to it.
Like freemium.
Yeah, I mean, so if you have something that you want to put in the chat, I can add it to the board, but
yeah, I think that, just to list some of the things I went through: comprehensive planning, comprehensive tribal community planning, and many of the different aspects of that can be adaptive, especially I'd say options for like where housing is located, and making sure you have escape routes for different disaster events.
All right.
So
Evacuation planning.
That.
You mentioned siting.
Siting, yeah, so siting of energy systems and other utilities, and then I think we talked about, even just reclaiming land as a land back is there. See that, or land access. I think failing full ownership. There's different ways to secure cultural use of lands, from land trust or from other institutions.
so Elizabeth, you did start to say something. Did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. And I'm gonna actually go back to Michelle again. So looking at the adaptation strategies from, again, given the different kinds of land tenure status in Oklahoma and in that area, what kind of strategies have you used to, if any, to work with the cities that are, a part of tribal land?
So there is a big intertribal emergency management coalition, and their whole
Nice.
job is to, 1, share information, 2, share equipment, and 3, pass on information via text or emails to local and tribal individuals.
That's
If there is
awesome.
a natural disaster, some sort of hazard in the area. So that's been a really big part of that, is just having that coalition of people just to even know what's going on.
And so,
You know what, I'm gonna put that, I'm gonna throw it over here because we're gonna have a whole conversation about collaborative, an interagency collaboration, that's like the perfect one for, but yeah, it's great.
and you said that also it puts out information for the community to know what's going on when there's an emergency situation.
Definitely. I know certain tribes here
Yeah.
have their own tribal texting system, like you were kind of talking about you implementing as well.
Nice. That's great. Let me see that I want to, put some other people on the spot. I can't really put Christina on the spot because I think you're on your phone, right, Christina? Or you're on it. I know you've been putting stuff in the chat, but not unmuting. So maybe you can't unmute. I have no mic. Oh man. Okay, well, I know Viejas is doing work, so if you want to add anything in the chat that we can put into the mural, that would be great. But
I have
So
a, I have a comment for allies or agency people. What I hear far too often from agency folks that are supposed to be working with tribes is the dismissive phrase, "Oh, well, those tribes just don't get along."
so
And I
let's
think
put
it's
that under
important
things that
for
aren't
us
working.
to speak up and say that's not true. It's really easy to just not say anything, but I think it's important to speak up and say that's not true, or that's not been my experience, so that agencies are more willing to engage, because somebody has to speak up and stop this crap.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Wow, okay.
That makes me think of something actually. Thank you for saying that. When I worked, sorry, people keep calling me when I'm speaking. When I worked for the state, I worked as an emergency coordinator at the California Offices of Emergency Services. And one of the things I found during those fires in 2017, 18, and 19 is that, and this is still the case, the Red Cross, the state has Red Cross drop-offs, right, where you're supposed to meet, and some of the tribes, especially in Northern California, I'm speaking more for Northern California, for whatever reason, they didn't have a good relationship with outside tribal community. So they felt it was unsafe. These are tribal leaders I'm talking about. They felt that it was unsafe during these fires to go to a Red Cross station. And these are the reasons why. Because of drugs. They were concerned that their tribal members would be around that type of environment. Number two, the other tribal members had said, and or the above, that they were concerned of the women and children's safety because of I'll just say it, being raped or killed, because they have a lot of those issues there in that area. There's high crime and kidnappings. So they didn't want to intermingle. So they needed to have, what they said is like, we're going to make our own meeting area without the Red Cross involved. There was a problem with that. The state would not drop off supplies in those areas where the tribal leader decided to have those emergency drop-offs and not have it affiliated with the Red Cross. And so the Red Cross kind of fought us on that decision. But we were still able to get drop-offs through donations and other ways. I went above their head, to be quite honest, to get the drop-offs. But that's still an issue right now. So I believe the state needs to change policy to where if the tribal leader, which is just as equivalent as a city government, which it is, if they say, hey, it's not safe, they should have the authority to have their own drop-off, their own Red Cross drop-off, so they can have supplies delivered. So it's not so much the tribes don't get along, the tribes are concerned with outside community and these threats that they have. So our world down here in Southern California is a little different up there, where they do have high rates of kidnappings and that sort of thing going on.
You're 100% right, Elizabeth. I mean, there are still like sundowner towns up here, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and then you have a fire, there's a life-threatening fire, and you have that going on, and the tribal leaders trying to, take control of the situation in a life-threatening situation, but yet keeping in mind that, hey, I also have women and children here that shouldn't be around intermingled with that community because bad things happen.
Absolutely. And a lot of times the tribes are doing it better. I mean, a little bit south of me, Kashaya does an amazing job with emergency response. So the tribe shouldn't be forced to schlep up to Gualala.
Yeah.
Stay Kashaya. It's where it's safe and somebody's paying attention to you and they know you and you're not having the Yahoo meth heads.
Yes, yes. And then leave it to the tribal leaders that know what's best for their community.
Wow, that's heavy. You know, you can see there's a Venn diagram here. There's some overlap. You know, we will be talking in more detail about emergency planning specifically. You know, but that still does become a part of the community engagement, education, and notification, because you want to notify during an emergency, here's a Red Cross shelter, but then your community members are afraid to go there because it's in a sundowner town, and then you're not able to get the help that you need from the agency to develop and you know, open and run your own emergency shelter. And so what are you supposed to notify your community to do? So I think we'll be seeing this reappear when we start talking about you know, the category of emergency planning and emergency preparedness. But, you know, thank you for sharing that story. That it breaks my heart.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
So I'm seeing, you know, in both of these, we're not really putting anything into the needs category yet. You know, what needs is this strategy aiming to address? And maybe that's kind of obvious in community engagement, education, and notification. We're aiming to address education and notification. You know, it's sort of
Yeah, let's get that one because it's really like each strategy came from some need, and we don't want to have to bifurcate all of it. But
Yeah.
maybe, you know, I think getting to the lessons learned, if we can kind of dive in on some of these strategies, those of you that have done these things and actually implemented them, what have you learned? Like how did it go? What worked, what didn't work?
Well, I will, since I already greased the wheel on this one, you know, so what worked and what didn't work with our plan. I had mentioned how getting people to sign up for it has been hard for our emergency alert system. Wait, where are we putting that? Is that a
I'm gonna
lessons
throw
learned?
that
Oh,
here. Yeah, I can do that for you while you talk.
yeah, that's it. That's all I wanted to say. We've had that, and then always on the community education and outreach piece is just getting people to show up. You know, is hard to do. So I'll put that in there. Getting people to show up.
Why is it hard to get people to sign up, Shasta? That part I didn't understand.
You know, I don't really have an answer for that. I feel like a bad anthropologist because I don't know. We've done our typical methods of outreach, which is we've put it on the website, we have done emails, we have put flyers out in the community, and then there's a monthly mailing, a physical mailing that goes out to tribal members every month, and we put a flyer in there. And so, you know, some people sign up and then some people don't. And I don't know how to get them to do it. You know, even when we put reassurances, our flyer has more information. Reassurances about, you know, anonymity and, you know, protecting their phone numbers. You know, we're not going to spam you. And we're still not getting much. But the new strategy I'm working on for that is that when there is a use for the emergency alert system, and I hear other people saying, well, how come I didn't hear that Paula Temecula Road was closed? That's when I say, because you're not signed up for our text alerts. And then you get more subscriptions because people say, ooh, you know, I didn't know about that. And now I want to be in the know. So I was able to put that in the tribal newsletter. You know, did you not hear about when those roads were closed? It's because you're not in the club. And we did get more subscriptions. So, but I don't know.
Would you say like word of mouth, if you were to give advice to the tribes?
I think, you know, word of mouth can work. And we've asked people to do that, you know, share this, or, and this is one I hadn't thought of, but now that we're brainstorming it, sign up your elders. You know, Osama, you said your grandma has a cell phone now. I hesitate to even ask how old your grandma is, because I suspect your grandma is probably younger than my dad, who refuses to get well, he got a smartphone for about a week, and my sister lives with him, and she was ready to put a pillow over his face because he was driving her crazy with all of his complaints. So she got him another flip phone.
I think, to be fair, I think it is a flip phone that she has and not a smartphone. So, but she would get
Okay.
the text alerts. I think that one, with engaging elders and people in general, I think it sounds really time and labor intensive, but door knocking is really one of the only sure ways of getting to some of the older folks,
Yeah.
because they get so many spam calls and things these days that it's actually, I mean, I think on both sides, my grandparents have been scammed before, by people reaching out to them, even somebody pretending to be me reaching out to them. And so it's really, I think it's a tough environment out there to be a government trying to reach your citizens, because they're just so inundated with spam. And I think one of the few ways to actually get out there, even with the kind of COVID restrictions, is actually getting out a street team. And one of the really great things about doing that is you can actually engage youth in that, and folks who don't need a super high level of background to be able to go out and talk to people, make lists of which homes do have elders living in them and might need to be contacted during a heat emergency.
Yeah.
And just like making your tribal presence felt. I think that's something I'd also encourage folks to think about, how you can make your community engagement events, friendly. And I know Shasta and I have done some fun spitballing about how to do better, more lively tribal meetings, but food, I think, goes a long way in particular.
Yes, food is a huge one, but yeah, Osamu and I have had a lot of fun. We're working on a heat plan thing right now. And I know I keep bringing this up, but one of the things we joked about doing is having a junker car, getting a car during a hot summer day, letting it heat up, and then letting people sit inside it for a few minutes just to see how hot a super hot car really is, or taking one of our firefighters and being like, all right, let's take bets on how long, Captain Doug can sit in this car before he has to tap out. We don't really want to do that, because then some dude who's got extra machismo is going to sit in that car until they pass out from heat exhaustion.
Don't use Wes. He's a friend. Use someone else.
We won't use Wes. We'll use one of our non-tribal firefighters. But we want to get like a giant thermometer and like stick it to that car and see, like, look, this car is 145 degrees inside, just to get people's attention. And as far as community engagement is concerned too, to get to people where they are, if you have a regularly scheduled tribal event that you can piggyback onto, put up a table, open your laptop or your iPad so people can sign up right then and there. That's what we've been doing. We have these monthly community events where we table and we give things away too. It's if you sign up for this, you're going to get here. I can show you our newest swag, which is this awesome Planet Paula coffee mug, travel mug. I know. Lori's like, here's my mailing address.
Oh, Shasta, something happened to your sound.
Oh no.
We hear you, but you're muffled, or at least for me. Is that true for others?
I think maybe because I pulled away from the microphone.
You're back.
Okay. Yes, but yes, my awesome Planet Paula. And so we gave these to people, and they were like, "Sure, we'll take your community survey because you're giving us a free thing."
And Kurt's got a comment here. It says monthly events are good for the community engagement because there are lots of sellers and food as well as our booth. I love a recurring thing.
Yeah.
Anywhere in my life, like socially, where like people just know something's coming. It doesn't have to get planned over and over again. It's a home for people to come together and gather. So like regular gatherings, I think, are good places to use for this kind of stuff.
Oh my gosh, Michelle, please send me. I will do an exchange with you. I will send you a Planet Paula travel coffee mug if you send me a Skoden Sharpie. And I want one I want a Studis too. Man, that's American. That's amazing. I love it.
I'll send you a mushroom or something from Northern California.
You know,
And
I'm wondering
I'll
if,
send you a pickling cucumber from my garden.
oh, I saw that picture.
No, this is great. And Christina, thank you for all the stuff you've been putting in the chat. I'm trying to copy and paste those into our wisdom well here.
I might have done it. So yeah,
Okay.
trying. Some
Yeah.
of them, a few things that are being said are going to be really great, and I think are going to help me think about speakers for when we get to like infrastructure improvements or operations and management, like when we get to those topics. And yeah, and maybe if you have actually, if you are doing stuff in those other categories, I would love to get you signed up and plugged in, ready to speak at those meetings. You know, on the community education side, I'm just wondering, you know, so it sounds like we've talked a lot about emergency notification, and we've talked generally, I think it was Christina put something in here about CERT training. So training, there's ways to train and then educate, right? There's a lot of training and education opportunities. I wonder if anybody wants to dive in deep and give us more of an example of like, what kind of workshop did you do? Why did you do it? Not in a planning one, but like an educational one to get people prepared for climate change in some way. Like, tell us how that went. Give us a deep dive.
I can go ahead. We just recently did one, and we had a climate adaptation event at Sac and Fox, and I think there were over 30 people there from 15 different tribes, and we brought in FEMA, BIA, IHS, Oklahoma University. So we're trying to bring in all these different collaborating partners that help with the research, that can help with the funding, that can help with kind of planning and technical assistance as well. And just like each piece of what goes in, and it was mainly about the floods, like I was mentioning. So we're looking at, you know, a flooding event. What are the risks? What are things that what's the climate data look like? Is it going to continue happening? That kind of thing.
What was that aimed at, like tribal members too?
It was anyone from tribal members. It was emergency management departments, environmental departments. We even had a few leaders there.
Yeah. Well, what went good about it? What worked?
I think what worked was seeing the research and climate data in use. How to take that data and use it for future planning and implementation, to look at it and be able to understand it. And I think that something that we could have done better was it was our first time to do the training all together. So I think something that we could have done better was have the breakout sessions dive deeper into the exercises about how the planning can go in the future. Sorry, my brain's not working. I'm hungry.
Same. I'm curious what barriers, if any, did you have to getting those other agency partners to participate?
They were actually everyone was on board.
Awesome.
We have a pretty good relationship with all of our FEMA tribal liaisons, and we have a good relationship with all the different people. So we had USGS come in, and that was really fascinating to see the different stream gauges and getting that sort of data. BIA talked about roads and infrastructure and for funding. I think the hardest piece was getting the county emergency manager to actually show up.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a place to place kind of a situation. Some are more willing than others. Ryan, I wonder, you mentioned earlier in the meeting today about the asthma training that's happening over in Nez Perce. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Uh-oh, maybe Ryan's on a phone call or something. But she mentioned that that's a really comprehensive program that they're doing out there for asthma, and I'm sure the wildfire smoke, because that's what we were talking about. That was the context, was a part of that. So maybe we can hear from her later on who her partners were with that. You know, and that's another example too of those tribes that are massive, you know, with the amount of land that they have. You know, again, you know, Standing Rock with, you know, 2-point-something million acres. It could be there's a fire on one part of it where the smoke affects, you know, the northern part of the reservation, but not the southern part because of the way the winds are blowing and things like that. So, you know, that I think is something to remember as a challenge, is that the size of your tribe and the size of your lands is really critical when it comes to planning this stuff, where you may end up having to have emergency management plans for different parts of your reservation. If you're dealing with 2.5 million acres, if you're the size of the Navajo reservation, which is like the size of New Jersey, you know, it's huge. Yeah, Osama.
Just in terms of communicating with folks at the kind of household level, just wanted to share two little pieces. One is we did a project before I came to CDPH with, there's 6 tribes in the top northeast corner of Oklahoma, Miami, Oklahoma, not Miami, Florida, that they have really severe flood risk challenges there. And one thing that I found really helpful in communicating with people, you know, with maps of flood risk and things like that is sometimes the way that FEMA talks about these different flood risk zones is quite confusing, and it doesn't actually help you understand, like, you know, what am I, you know, what is the 100-year or 500-year floodplain? I think that's not a very intuitive idea, and I much prefer if you can do the calculation to share, okay, what is the chance that during a 30-year period, so like the span of an average mortgage, what's your likelihood of getting flooded during that period based on those same, you know, FEMA maps? So if you can share just kind of the actual time scale that people tend to make decisions about things like, you know, whether or not to buy a house somewhere because it floods in that neighborhood, then that I think can be a much better communication tool or educational tool. The other thing I wanted to share is I recently connected with regional asthma management program of the Public Health Institute, and they are looking for tribal partners in the kind of, they call it like the border region, but really it sounds like it'll extend up as far as like San Diego and beyond, to keep piloting a program that they have to help community health workers go and meet with people to help develop asthma management plans for them. They'll actually go to your home, and you know, once they've built some trust, those community health workers will actually do kind of an environmental scan where they'll say, okay, here's some different things I'm seeing, you know, about your house or like where your house is located that might also exacerbate your asthma. And so I think that's a really great opportunity if folks are looking for some support in terms of like, how do we actually get out there and talk to people who might be, you know, health vulnerable to wildfire smoke or dust and things like that. So I can actually, I'll forward you that contact, Shasta, if you want to circulate it to other people in the group.
Sure. And you know what that makes me think too is about I think what you or somebody had mentioned earlier about getting youth out and doing the actual door-to-door stuff. You know, some communities are better organized for that than others. You know, when you've got some that are where the houses are very scattered, you got to have somebody who can, you know, drive and knows where to go and who the people are. But in others, you do have neighborhoods where you can go door to door. And having the kids do that, especially when it comes to their own, you know, aunties and uncles and grandparents and things, can be really helpful. It's hard to say no to the shining face of a youngster, or the grumpy face of a teenager, you know, if you can get them involved in that. But also, I just want to second your advice to make sure we're using terms that people can understand. And actually, Angie and I talked about the little bit before we started that in the Karuk tribes plan, they use the word proximate. Not everybody's going to know what proximate means. You know, they might think it means approximate, you know, this is approximately this or that, but no, it actually means close to, you know, or connected to. 500-year flood, 100-year flood, that's perfect. I actually had an older guy on a board that I sat on, a resource conservation district board, who was like, last time we had a flood that big was in 1913. So it's 2013. So we're going to have a big flood. Like, that's not what a 100-year flood means. And it's not intuitive. A 100-year flood means a flood that has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. I don't know why they don't call it a 1% flood instead of a 100-year flood. Makes no sense. Anyway. So
I think
thank
that
you for
goes like connects to what Osama was saying about maps, and just there's some
Yes.
technical language and messaging that just doesn't translate well. We have to make it more user friendly.
Right. Absolutely right. Anybody else? Any thoughts on that along those lines, or any of these lines, Lori?
Yeah, this is one of the things that the adaptation menu that I was talking about before we started does really well, and I'll dump it into the chat, is they incorporate tribal language in the adaptation menu.
Right.
And so, although it sounded like a little slice of hell to me, they said they had a 4-hour meeting about one word in the tribal
Wow.
language, just to get it right and to get all the tribal members to agree that that was the correct word to use.
But you know what? I bet there was a lot of other useful stuff that came out of that 4-hour conversation. And that's making me think of the Swinomish Tribal Health Indicators project, where they have Swinomish language in their plan that the tribal folks came up with. And we're trying to do that more in Paula. We have language revitalization for the Kupania language. And so we want to use those words and make it feel more connected to people's you know, culture and tradition. Even in a place like Paula, where it's revitalized, we don't have any fluent speakers of Kupano, and haven't for decades, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean we can't try to make this a part of our outreach, and people feel so much more connected to that when they can say, this is the language my ancestors spoke, and now we're speaking it again and trying to help our community.
Yeah, and they put youth that were language learners alongside elders that were language speakers. So not only was that language being sustained, but it was being grown like any active language, because the youth would say, well, what about this? Couldn't you say this instead? And so it really sounded like an amazing process.
And I love how kids also can just teach us about what their lingo is, and how much it embarrasses them when one of the olds tries to use their language. I recently said something about something being my ride or die, and no, apparently I am too old to say that.
Shasta, you just need to have Riz like me.
Riz?
I
What
don't
the
even
heck
know
is
that one.
Riz?
Oh, geez.
Ask the youth, they'll tell you.
Yeah, you're not. You just turned 40. You're not allowed to talk like that.
We can't see you, so we don't know if you got any Riz or not, Kurt.
Oh, this is the menu. Thanks, Lori.
I like the cover.
Yeah, we've talked about this one before. It is good. They really took a lot of care with making sure it was reflected all the different cultures.
Well, I love it when we are filling in the stickies and we're like running out of space, you know, because this is what creates the wisdom well. This is what we're sharing with others to learn from what we as people who have gone through this have done. But my favorite is when people suggest things that I've never heard of, and that I say, oh my gosh, I totally want to do that now. You know, not all of it is relevant to all of us. So I'm always excited when there's something new that I can adapt to my program. So yay. Oh, you scared me there for a minute, Angie. I'm like, why was it blank? It came up blank. Don't do that. You don't want to lose it now.
No, we're good. You know, I wondered if we have just like a couple more minutes if we wanted to. We did a good job kind of filling in community Engagement, education, notification. If there's any other examples on the policy, planning, and land use, we want to just take one more crack at kind of like deep diving into one example and kind of pulling it through. I'm thinking, we haven't talked much about this, but maybe people want to go right for anarchy when we talk about planning for plans. But we do assign ourselves more planning assignments when we do an adaptation plan, and some of them end up being like on the natural environment, on the natural resource side, right? We haven't talked a lot about those. So water contingency, habitat restoration, pest management, pest stuff, integrated pest management. What is there any one of those that have come out of anybody's adaptation planning processes that you'd like to talk about, and like just talk about what went well and not well?
I'm gonna go ahead and throw something out there just because reasons, because I have a ton of examples. You mentioned integrated pest management. So we had an integrated pest management plan, and it was more focused on our agricultural enterprises. We have avocados, we have citrus, and then there were attempts also to share that with the general community about more natural pest management, not using chemicals and things like that. And that was all well and good, but it wasn't really climate specific. But what I am now involved with, just as a function of doing so much cross-cutting, cooperative stuff with agencies and with other tribes, I was asked to sit on a pesticide working group with the state. And unfortunately, I haven't been super involved with it because it always seems to conflict with something that I can't move. But just this week, the members of the team sent out some of their materials, and one of the tribal members that's part of that group, her name is Mio Marufo. She had the most amazing contributions to make for how to make the IPM more friendly and communicative for tribal members. So sorry, that's more on the engagement and education side of things.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But still, it was something that it had a lot of stuff I hadn't considered in terms of planning for our own pesticide use, potentially in part.
I see the
But to also use it as an educational opportunity for our members. And this wasn't Mio's idea, it was somebody else on the team from the state. And I can't remember the agency right now. Lori or Osama, you might know her. No, I think her name is Lariba Wahibi.
Weba. She works for a WEHA.
Oh, she works for WEHA, of course. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So she was the one who sucked me into this.
She's pretty amazing too.
She is, but they came up with a bingo game, a pesticide bingo game, and Mio took that and basically indigenized it with the different ways that tribal members might come in contact with pesticides. And so it's a really wonderful thing that both, again, for doing pest management planning. And how does that relate to climate change? Wildfire comes through, it wipes something out, you have reseeding of stuff, and then pesticide is applied to it to try to keep the invasive species from coming back in, or water management and what plants are being harvested, and and then pesticides applied to, and getting into the water, getting into the things that are harvested. It all really does relate. Oh, and what Christine said in the chat, forest management, fire management plans also involve pest management, and pests become more frequent when habitats are stressed by drought and fire and heat. So it all relates. I don't know if this is really the deep dive you were looking for, Angie, but I have found that the pest thing has been a tough nut for me to crack, and this has been really helpful.
So what was the name of the thing that you thought was really good?
Oh,
You said a pesticide use campaign.
Well, the pesticide bingo was really cool.
Pesticide bingo?
Yeah, that was just one of their
Okay.
Outreach strategies. I don't remember the name. It's basically I think it's a California tribal pesticides working group.
So just kind of gamifying something to make it more attractive for people. It's
Yes.
hard to get attention. Gosh, like of all the things human beings are trying to think about, and we're like, pests will be your number one today. We've decided.
Yeah, and I just looked it up. It's the Tribal Pesticides Working Group.
And to get educators involved in all this,
Yeah,
that's why Wava and Nancy's work with that, I think, has been great. Mio's an educator at heart. She may pretend to be an artist only, but she's really a great educator. And so making sure educators are involved in all of this is critical.
yeah, yeah. And then I know we only have a few minutes left, but Kurt, do you want to give like the 30 to 60-second version of some of the plans that we're working on right now?
Oh, geez, we're working on every plan, right? We're doing a comprehensive land use management plan. I don't know what the official name for it we're calling it, but yeah, our comprehensive
It's
plan. So
clump.
yeah, so we kind of combine, all the proposed construction, activities, housing communities, and we'll be involved in that. So we can hopefully include some of the natural resource planning, climate change planning. We've also got our INRMP, Integrated Natural Resource Management Plan, hopefully finalized. We're doing some updates. Gosh, we've got so many other things down the channel, but those are the two big ones I think that are kind of going on right now.
Yeah, and we have a fire
And, like-
plan and we have a forest management plan,
Yes.
and we're about to start on what I'm calling a tribal general plan, which is going to have to do with where things can be built. Building codes is a part of that. So
Oh yeah, we have our codes and regs coming down the pipeline too, so we can hopefully enforce some of these environmental, cultural resource issues, which will
Yes.
also hopefully help prepare us for some climate change.
yeah, and just kind of circling back to what Ryan had said about some of the difficulty with a person who doesn't want to acknowledge the connection between fire and climate. We can do this stuff, Lori. We can do this stuff without having to necessarily say it's climate. And these plans are an example of that. We're definitely including climate impacts in all of these plans. But if there are people who are nervous about it or they're pushing back on it for political reasons, you say, you know what, we have to do a habitat management plan. And these are the impacts to our habitats. You don't have to say what's causing them. You can just say that they exist. We have fire,
That's, I
we
think,
have
the-
drought.
That's the beauty, right? All these other plans are kind of institutionalized. They're not
Right.
controversial, but I think the idea, like, to flow it down from an adaptation plan means they would have happened anyways, but now we're going to make sure that the vulnerabilities we just learned about are included, right? We're going to consider the future that is not going to look the same, and we're going to change those plans accordingly.
Yeah. All right, we got 2 minutes left, so I think we're going to wrap it up. But I know we had a smaller group than usual today, but this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm really grateful to all of you for being here. And Angie, you want to go through the wrap ups and getting us ready for next time?
Yeah. Next time we are going to, like this time we looked at the Karuk's plan. Next time we're going to look at another tribe's plan. I don't even know. Is it Ute?
Yes, Ute.
Okay. Ute Mountain. So their climate action plan. And we're going to look at section 510. Because that's the one that seems a bit the most relevant to us. I think it's health related, and it's going to help us talk. Oh, you know what? It's infrastructure. There's a lot of infrastructure in there. That's why we picked it. And so that's our topic for the next time. And we're going to meet back again on July 20th. We're going to dive that time into the infrastructure improvement category and information technology category. So we're going to be looking for speakers, examples like we did today with Paula and with Asamu, kind of going into some detail on some examples of strategies that fall into these categories. So if you have some and you want to talk about it, we'd love to have you talk. And that is it. We'll send out all the information as we always do, all the follow-up information, and then we will see you next month.
All right, thank you again, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. Stay safe, and we'll see you here next month.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thanks all.